listeners, and welcome to another episode of Current Events on Tap, a podcast brought to you by the Alex Kirsch Project, where, like the drinks, the current events are on the house. And I'm your host, Alex Kirsch, pragmatic, progressive, U.S. Army veteran, truck driver, gamer, and streamer. If this is your first time on the show, please do not forget to hit like, share, and comment. And we are currently streaming live on YouTube, Twitch, and the X platform formerly known as Twitter. Now, the format of this show is simple. I bring on one or more guests onto the show. We talk beer or beverage of choice and current events of the week. Each person will discuss their beverage of choice for this hour. Whether it's alcoholic or non-alcoholic, it does not matter. Then each person is going to cover two current events of their choosing. Might be different tonight, though. They give the current event, they give their assessment, and then each person gets a chance to give their assessment, and then we're going to discuss it. Now, debate is going to be possible, but rest assured you are in a good faith zone, and you will get your chance to get your point across. The point of this space is for all of us to discuss the issue, what we think of it, and keep an open mind to what the other person has to say. But please remember to keep it within TOS. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our guest this evening, the host of the Redline Podcast, and a very, very good friend of the show, Michael Hilliard. What's going on, Michael?
Not too much. Yourself, how are you?
I'm tired. I'm tired, boss. Dog tired. I know you are too, because you only got 3 hours sleep before you jumped on. So for those not aware, why don't you go ahead and give yourself a little bit of background so people can kind of familiarize themselves with you.
Of course. So I'm Michael. I run the Redline Podcast. I've been a conflict journalist for a very long time. I used to be deployed quite a lot overseas. These days, I mostly do defense and economic analysis on particularly Russian and Central Asian military affairs, and head up the project doing analysis on Central Asian military capacities. So I, all the names, almost unpronounceable names in the world is unfortunately the guys I specialize in. So yeah, we have to be here, and always great to chat with Alex.
Absolutely. And I tell everybody, when it comes down to geopolitics, I always say, if you want to talk geopolitics, Michael is my go-to guy, because I know he's going to give me an honest opinion about everything. And the thing I love about your podcast still is you always bring in, 3 people that actually specialize in that region. If you're talking about Haiti, you bring in 3 people that specialize in Haiti. If you bring up people about Oman, there's 3 people that have actually been to Oman. They actually understand what goes on in that country. Syria, at one point you brought in the guy that was the former ambassador to the United States for Syria, or the former ambassador for Syria that was from the United States on your show. Talk about the situation. It's just those are the kinds of people you bring in. You don't bring in Joe Blow that might have read a blog about fucking Syria. It's a guy that actually has spent time in the damn country, which is one of the things I love about your podcast so much. And I always listen to it as much as possible.
That's the whole point. I think anyone who thinks they know everything is probably not aware of much. I have a fairly generic kind of, a general sense of a lot of topics, but, experts are going to know those details and, know which rocks to look under and where the interesting story is. So, it's always good to get much better specialists in. And, some of these experts are the most boring people you'll ever meet, but they know exactly everything about that one subject. Others are, most of them are absolutely lovely. But it is nice to, for instance, I know a little while ago we had, the head of the US operation who running Iraq, the whole war in Iraq and Afghanistan for a while, and having him on the show to be like, hey, we're talking about this decision. Why did you make this decision? It's always nice.
Absolutely. Yep. And a lot of the podcasts I've listened to, they've always had people that are subject matter experts on the material, which I think is really, really essential because, and if people say it's boring, well, okay. Can everybody remember the times when they might have been in some kind of a college course, it might have been boring, but the source material was good, and it's actually essential for you to kind of pay attention? This is why I encourage people to come and listen to your podcast, because you're going to learn something. You're definitely going to learn something regarding this podcast. That's why I try to, anytime people say, oh, geopolitics, oh, I know, I got the guy for you. I got the guy for you right now. So, but, anyway, once again, Michael, thank you so much for once again popping on this platform. I am really, really glad that you're on here. Cheers to you, my good friend. I know it's probably very early in the morning in your neck of the woods, but I take you're drinking coffee right now?
I am drinking coffee. Usually, I think almost anytime I do kind of one of these have a drink and whatnot shows, I usually have a vodka just to play along and be nice, but I think it's 8 a.m. my time, and I've got a brunch to be at, so I think it might.
Yeah.
I think my mother-in-law might be a bit annoyed if I rock up drunk at 10 a.m. otherwise, I 100% would usually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. I understand completely. Yeah. So tonight I'm actually drinking. I can't pronounce this. Narragansett. I think it's a New England style beer. I've never really had this before, but I bought this and I was like, it sounds interesting enough. It's an American beer, from what I can understand, so it's halfway decent. But tonight I'm drinking out of my coveted Molly pitcher mug that I got at a Molly pitcher ball when I was stationed in Vilsig, Germany, actually. So, yeah, I occasionally like my beverages of choice change. So, what were you gonna say?
I am drinking this is a peppermint tea, and this is a mug I picked up last time, I think 2 trips ago, to Tajikistan, of all places.
Tajikistan. Well, look at you. You got a cup from a place with the stand on it. So
lots of cups from places with stand on it.
Absolutely.
The other one, lots of times in those countries.
Yeah. I remember. I remember specifically one time, like you took like was it your current wife that you took to Uzbekistan, or was it somebody else that you took to Uzbekistan in the middle of a war zone or something like that?
That's I'm trying to remember which story that would be. I mean, those countries are usually fairly stable, so it probably wouldn't be Uzbekistan. My guess, if it's sorry with my wife, I mean, I took her into Transnistria, and that was a bit hairy at times.
Okay.
But obviously, I do remember going to Kyrgyzstan.
Kyrgyzstan, that's what it was.
Yeah, so we ended up riding. We decided to ride horses because that's kind of the thing you do while you're there. And my poor wife came with me. We rode through this kind of beautiful valley field, thinking it was a great time, not realizing it was an artillery proving ground. Which was a problem. And I don't think I've ever seen. I've never heard there was a little Kyrgyz man with us who was kind of helping us get through this, and swears in English. I know that now.
Yeah,
a lot of Russian expletives after that. But yes, the first word was F and in English.
Yeah, I've only been to Kyrgyzstan once, but that was because I was on my way from Germany to Afghanistan, and Manas was the loading point for like people before they went into country. Actually,
it was. Manas is a really, really famous kind of American
beautiful mountain ranges. Beautiful mountain ranges.
Oh yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful country, and the whole story behind Manas is absolutely fascinating. That the US effectively had the base. Manas was the main one. They used to do some stuff through Uzbekistan as well, and then when the Uzbeks had a massacre of their own people, and the US condemned them, Manas was the only place to go. Everyone went to Manas, and because they were the only place to go, the Kyrgyz started charging the United States just unfathomable amount of money to use the facilities. Like every day, it was a running joke that sort of every day the Kyrgyz government would call. It was, there's a new runway tax, and it's another $25,000 every time you land. So the US is not in that base anymore.
Really? I did not know that.
No, the US left it in, it's too early to remember the exact year, but I think it's about 2014-ish.
Okay.
Maybe a bit later. But yeah, these days it's effectively run by the Russians. But the Russians mostly work out of Kant, which is a little just east of there.
Gotcha. That's interesting. All right. So anyway, should we just get this party started?
Fire away.
All right. So the first topic I'm going to talk about, and like I said, usually I have like something like to kind of go off of, but earlier this week, the stock market across the United States was like people were saying that it was pretty much going to crash, right? People were afraid they were going to go into a recession. Now, here's the thing. I am not good when it comes down to the stock market. From what I understand, though, a lot of the issues that were coming, like where it stemmed from, and people are trying to blame President Biden for all the issues with the stock market. People are trying to say, President Biden is the cause for the stock market, which is always interesting because the stock market reached level highs this year alone, but they don't seem to give Biden any credit whatsoever. Now, again, I'm not an expert on the stock market. I know you have a degree in economics and whatnot, but the thing is, like, people seem to think that, the president of the United States is in control of everything. He's in control of economics in New Zealand. He is in control of economics all across the world. when things are going great, he doesn't get any credit, but when things are going bad, he gets all the blame kind of deal. Now, from what I understand, the stock market in places like Japan is where everything kind of kicked off, where everything was like starting to take kind of a nosedive. Now, from what I understand, and I looked up earlier today, was that the stock market is starting to stabilize a little bit, but not as fast as it should be. Now, here's the thing. Here's what I'm not understanding, though. Once again, everyone is freaking out, and they're saying that it's going to be an economic crash. We're going to go into recession. Now, back in 2021, we were still coming out of the pandemic, right? And so there was a lot of supply chain issues. There was a lot of issues regarding like how they're going to get the economy back on track, which, let's be honest, regardless of who was in office, that was going to be a pain in the absolute ass to get your country back online. Now, the United States has actually done fairly well compared to most other first world nations as far as getting their economy back on track. Now, when it came down to it, inflation did go up to insanely high levels, but then the Secretary of Treasury, good God. Oh, geez, what's her name?
Janet Yellen.
Yellen, that's what it is. She used to be working for the Federal Reserve. What she did was they actually ended up increasing interest rates to ensure that the country does not go into a recession. And it actually worked because we did not go into a recession. Now you got people out there saying, oh, we're going to go into a recession once again. Based upon what? We haven't gone into a recession yet. I think it's just people are just freaking the hell out because they just want to blame Biden for absolutely everything on the moon. Now, yes, I will admit I am voting for the Democratic ticket. I voted for Biden in 2020, and I'm definitely going to be voting for Harris and Walz, simply because I feel like they have the better positions. Not just because I have a severe case of TDS. I will definitely say this. I have severe Trump derangement syndrome, but there's a reason for that, though. But Michael, would you mind explaining to me what is it with the stock market? Why is it? Are people's worries are they just fucking losing their shit over nothing? Still there?
Okay, so to go through, effectively, the president does have some influence. And the best analogy I've ever heard about how much an American president impacts the stock market and impacts the wider world economy. Imagine the Americans as a giant cruise ship. Now, these cruise ships are like the size of suburbs. Sometimes they're massive. And when you turn the wheel on a cruise ship, you don't just yank left and right. It's a very, you're turning a whole suburb. And yes, you can turn the wheel and you actually won't feel the ship fully, reach where it's the heading it's trying to get to for quite a while. That's how it works. You don't just turn it like a car. So when American economy, quite often a decision made here will be, you won't feel any effects of it till 2-3 years down the track. That's just how the economy works. Now, world economy wise, you do tend to find that the US, being such a large boat, is going to sort of ripple ships that are closer to it a bit more. They're going to rise and fall with the US as it goes. Others that are less connected to the US probably won't feel as much of this. When it comes to what the recent panic in the market, effectively there have been a few figures come out, particularly the tech stocks that are not nearly as good as what people hoped. And there is a bit of, it's a panic. And this is the trouble with the markets is they all see a couple of stocks go red and they panic, and there's a lot of panic selling that happens. The Japanese particularly had some bad financial numbers come back. Nothing particularly crazy, nothing like the Asian financial crisis, but enough to spook a few people. And at that point, effectively, you've got, their stock market panics, the Chinese, the Shanghai stock market panics. You start to see other markets panic. And then by the time it reaches the US, because of the weirdness of, you guys being behind time zone wise, there is a bit of panic selling there, particularly in tech stocks, which, again, people were putting numbers in that are not looking like they were going to happen. And same with Australia as well. Everyone kind of expected the inflation rate to come down, also the interest rate to come down. Most of the guys are keeping it steady because they're a bit worried about some of the numbers coming back when it comes to job figures and a few other curves. But I guess the best way to put it, and for people who aren't as depressed as I am by doing an economics degree, an economy shouldn't, and a recession isn't the end of the world. Every good economist, you can't have infinite growth effectively. You can somewhat, but what an economist wants is this kind of 3% up and down like this. And the best way to imagine it is you want to keep a really stable temperature in the room. And if it's too cold, you put a bit of heat in, and the temperature goes up. Or if it's too hot, you take it down a bit. When it comes to a situation like the pandemic, when they went, oh, holy hell, this is, we need to do something immediately. They imagine just jamming the air conditioner as hard as you can to try and make sure this doesn't implode. Because the trouble is that if you let a recession just happen, you don't do any quantitative easing, you don't do any economic policies, a business owner will fire out 10 of his staff because he'll panic and go, oh, this is going to get bad. They fire 10 staff. If you manage to stabilize the economy somewhat, he only fires 3. And again, there's massive inefficiencies that happen when you start mass firing people. And again, when 10 people get fired, they stop consuming. When people stop consuming, the wider economy has problems. So generally, you want to make sure that you have this little up and down, just slightly up and down the whole way. Now, people blaming Biden for the inflation and everything you guys have got at the moment. The Americans got probably the least inflation of any developed nation in the world. You guys are doing better than anyone. And in fact, it's the American economy pretty much keeping everyone propped up at the moment. There's been massive problems with a lot of other economies, and the Americans still consuming at a pretty high level, and the stability of the American dollar has kept everyone fairly comfortable at the moment. So Biden's team's done quite well, considering we all, every economist was going into the pandemic going, hey, we're going to jam this air conditioner as hard as it possibly can. Maybe everyone gets to keep their jobs. It doesn't become a depression, and everyone went, okay, cool. So in 3 years, we're going to have to deal with a massive recession then, because we're going to have to effectively jam it to cold, the air conditioner as cold as possible to try and stop that economy running away. But we didn't actually get that. We had a fairly soft landing out of everything. So we never had that crazy recession. And even the numbers that the worst case numbers that people are talking about, it's either going to be a rate cut, later on in the year, probably right before the election, which will make Biden look lovely, or it'll be, a slight recession, which is like, yeah, the room gets a little bit colder than you probably want it, but it's not, this is a nothing compared to, what everyone was kind of modeling for, at that point coming into when we started pushing money into the economy during COVID. So, yeah, so sorry to depress everyone on that one.
It's okay.
But yes, economics is a awfully interesting but awfully boring subject.
Well, I think it's basically like, and here's the funny part, is just like, I feel like when people talk about like recession and they talk about the stock market, they just read the headlines and they make a decision based upon that without doing any real research into the topic matter. Okay. Now, like I said, when it comes on economics, I'm a complete moron on this. But the thing is, though, for example, I was on Twitter the other day, or X the other day, and people are saying, oh my God, people live from paycheck to paycheck. I'm like, it's been that way for years in the United States.
Yes.
It's been that way always. Like, there are some people in this country, they've been living paycheck to paycheck for years. It's not like a new phenomenon. Now, a lot kind of plays into it, essentially. But the thing is people like to say, oh, well, the stock market, it's all Biden's fault. Well, these are the same people that blame Biden for gas prices, for crying out loud. And I was like, you do realize that gas prices have absolutely nothing to do with the president, because first off, we haven't nationalized the gas economy, essentially. And there's a guy that's on TikTok, Mr. Global 2. Love his channel because he always explains that the president has very, 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 very little say in how gas prices work, essentially. Now, some decisions might affect gas prices, but it's very minimal. It's all about supply and demand. The same thing like with the stock market. Now, when I looked into it, there are some economists out there that are saying, listen, this has nothing to do with the president. It has to do, like, and you and I have talked about it in great detail, about, like, gas prices. Let's say, for example, I'm just going to pick a country. If Saudi Arabia tomorrow engaged in a war against a rival country of some sort, and they get involved into a war, they're going to prioritize all the oil that they need to drill into their country, and they're going to prioritize it towards their level, right? Which means what? That the gas prices are going to rise, essentially. Now, people need to understand that it's like the president of the United States has little to no say on that matter, okay? Hey, Callie, how you doing? One of my friends. She's just tuning in right now. But the thing is that, like, the reason why the stock market was crashing is because of some economic decisions that, some people might have made. And, like, I brought up Japan for a reason. It's because they're the ones that took the biggest hit. Now, again, I wouldn't say that the stock market is crashing to the point where it cannot be recovered, because as of right now, it seems to be stabilizing. Am I wrong?
It's pretty much back to where it was, pre-crash. It's, most stocks are pretty much where they were a couple of days ago. Because again, this is how the free market system works. Effectively, we are going to, people sell off a bunch of stocks. They panic, they don't want to be in this, and you do find a lot of institutional lenders will then buy out those stocks at a cheaper price if they think they're going to go long term with them. Mm-hmm. So, it's not, again, what you want to stop is this, runaway effect. When the recession starts kicking in, or when there's problems, and people think about firing one staff member, you don't want the situation to get worse where they start thinking about firing 10. Mm-hmm. Same with the economy. You don't want people to start, you start taking a 2% cut, and then people go, oh my god, okay, I'm not expanding my business, I'm not doing anything, I'm gonna not buy anything, and you cut the consumer market and you end up with this runaway train situation. But yes, when it comes to oil and petrol in particular, the president does have huge long-term effects. So for instance, the United States does massive subsidies for the oil and gas market, much more than almost any other country. Yeah. And making decisions about which energies to use, what to do, stability wise, which terminals to build. But you sign the paperwork and you don't see anything of that for 5 years. Now the president can do some real short-term things, like Biden's been pretty good about keeping a reserve of petrol at all times, even though that's quite an expensive and difficult thing. To the point where, as a classic example, the one I give is, in Australia, we do not get any oil from Saudi Arabia. We're mostly Malaysia and a few other places. When there was a drone strike on a Saudi Arabian oil facility, put it out, it's a very big facility, effectively went down for a couple of days. Our petrol price still spiked by 20 cents that day. Mm-hmm. And why would that make sense? People go, oh, well, greedy companies. Well, not really. What's actually happening is Saudi Arabia has left the market that day because people aren't just buying a year's worth in a day. They're just getting a constant supply. 100 ships rock up each day from Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia's out for a day, the richer countries go, well, I'm not going to just go a day without petrol. They end up contacting, they end up buying, anyone else who's got oil on the market to try and supplement them from that time. What that does is that there's less supply in the market, the demand goes up, the price goes up, and your rich countries tend to outbid people. This is how the market works. Biden's done some, to get petrol price, pretty good stuff. For instance, opening up Venezuela as an option, and effectively allowing Venezuela to become a bigger player on the market. That's helped lower oil prices, particularly in the Western Hemisphere.
It's interesting you bring that up because, I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
you're right.
It's interesting because people were very critical about him, but they don't realize that Venezuela is it's massive with the amount of oil that they actually drill for. And people thought it was wrong for him to seek out Venezuela, to be an oil supplier, because I looked into this. What people don't understand is all the oil that, yes, we are the number one exporter in the world. Last time I checked about oil, right? The thing is, all the oil we export and all the oil we drill for, we don't necessarily use because there are different products that we actually have to import. Now, when people are complaining, oh, well, we don't need to import oil. Actually, yes, we do, because not everything we use in this country is the same kind of oil we can actually drill in our own country. Am I wrong in that?
No, and this is welcome to market forces. I mean, this is the trouble, that if you went, okay, let's make ourselves oil independent, as the kind of saying goes. Yeah. I mean, you could technically do it, but why would you? Considering there are so many different places and cheaper places to get oil. And this is the thing that people don't realize, is that a barrel of oil to get out the ground is a completely different price depending on which country you're in. Mm-hmm. So to get a barrel out of, let's say, the North Sea in England is going to cost you about $45 a barrel. To get it out of Saudi Arabia is going to cost you about $8. So if the United States was to go, oh, well, I'm going to, no oil for me, I'm just going to use United States oil. The US oil, depending on where you are, can be anywhere between, $13, $18 a barrel up to $50, $60 a barrel if you're really expensive places. Why would you effectively just give up this option where you've got, $8 a barrel coming in from Saudi Arabia, which you can refine and put back on the American market? For what? Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. You're now just upping the prices. You're not only taking the US investment in all these countries and keeping it going and making sure that if one country goes down, it doesn't completely destroy everyone else, but you're now just making things more expensive on the American market. The Americans what they tend to do is they go and they spend a little bit more to make sure that there's massive capacity in the United States, so that if worst case scenario, or they want to make sure that they can, take a much more dominant position in the market, it's easier to ramp up. It's easier to get a car from 60 kilometers an hour to 70 than it is to go from 0 to 70. But they make sure that all these other places are still going, because that does allow for much cheaper oil, allows for better infrastructure in there, allows people to be having different avenues for different countries as well. Because this is the other trouble, that, if Saudi Arabia was to go down because the US don't import or export anything from Saudi Arabia, okay, now you've got the infrastructure goes there, the people leave there, you start having things become more expensive, and that's going to have roll-on effects for the European markets and everything else as well. So it is, the US strategy is to keep diversified, but also have a massive core, domestic core that it is willing to spend a bit more money on. So again, this is what global powers can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I kind of want to talk about the stock market, because if, from what I understand right now, I could be wrong, please feel free to correct me on this, but let's say, for example, if a tragic occurrence, like for example, if we had Taiwan, we get a lot of is it Taiwan that we get semiconductor plants made in there?
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, a massive tsunami takes place in Taiwan, okay? And some of these semiconductors go down, and a lot of products we get made there goes down, okay? Automatically, what happens?
So semiconductors is an odd one, because it's a really individual, unique market to anything else. So, the classic in most economies, in most places, in most products, you tend to find that the market will actually adapt to it. So classic example, when face masks before the pandemic, who was making face masks? No one was making face masks. It's a couple of people, not a huge thing. When everyone demands them, all of a sudden, all these companies that were making, clothes or making, pencil cases, whatever the other making, adapt, and they go, oh wow, okay, the price of this is now, I'm going to make way more money doing face masks than I am on making pencil cases, and they shift to making face masks. So as the price goes up, the supply on the market goes up, and then eventually everything stabilizes to where it is.
Sure. With
semiconductors, because it's such a unique product that only effectively Taiwan can make at scale, you can't have anyone else enter that market to effectively push that up. We're talking the high-end chips here. The low-end stuff, the line tends to be kind of about PS5, really enough. From most analysts tend to put that as the sort of dividing line. Anything more complicated than a PS5 is Taiwan, and that's about the only place you can get it. In the United States, a very small capacity. Anything below a PS5, you might be able to see China ramp up. You might be able to see, South Korea, a few other places go, but those are also, and it's an industry that has a massive barrier to entry as well. You don't just go, I'm going to make semiconductors. It's $1 billion investment to get involved in semiconductors. So it's probably not a good example of what you're hoping for, because it is a uniquely disastrous industry.
That's what I mean, though. If for example, the tsunami takes out a few dozen, a couple semiconductor plants, that means it's going to kind of overhaul all the other plants, wouldn't it? And then say for example, if you got semiconductor chips that are involved in the stock market, right? What's going to happen to their stock? Are they going to have to start buying, or they could start selling and whatnot? Because my point is, if a pandemic or a catastrophe happens where they are unable to produce the same amount that they can produce at that point, right? Even if, let's say for example, in Florida, they have a freak occurrence of winter because of climate change and whatnot, and they are unable to produce as many oranges. What's going to happen? The price of oranges is going to skyrocket, because not as much oranges are going to get produced, essentially. That's kind of my point, though. I mean, you kind of understand where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah, I do. So the orange is a pretty good example. So fruit, we're just going to use that as a very generic option. So let's say that, you have a orange farm or orange company that's wiped out inside Florida by some sort of freak storm. The company, there'll be some people who will just hold on to the stock. Some people may even buy some more stock, because the stock price is going to go down. They're not going to make profit, at that point. But what you're going to find is that the price of oranges goes up. So let's say the price of oranges was $3 before this. It goes up to $5. At that rate, and if it holds, then people think that Florida is going to be out for a season. You are going to see a lot of the different climates, guys who are in similar positions, whether it be in Africa, whether they be in South America, Australia, wherever it is, effectively look at that and go, price of oranges is much better than bananas this year. I'm going to plant oranges. And then you find that, yes, there's a temporary problem in the market, but effectively the market solves itself. And that's how the kind of world economy tends to work, is that as, there is, the price goes up, because there's this, I probably should have done it a bit earlier, but there is a minimum point of entry, effectively. Let's say, let's say a country like Australia, we could make oil, no problem at all, as a classic example.
Sure.
But it's going to cost us $80 a barrel to make that. So unless oil reaches, past this point, we're never entering that market. You are finding that, at the moment, most people are pretty efficient. If you have storms and the price goes up, that does push the bar up enough that there will be some that will enter the market. But it really depends on what the product is, how easy it is to make, how easy it is to switch over to it. Toilet paper, face masks, really easy to make. Oranges take a bit of time because you got to grow them. Yep. Semiconductors, nearly impossible to enter that market.
That's kind of what I was thinking. So, at the end of the day, when the stock market does well, you can obviously say that the business productivity, whether it's the a certain niche product and whatnot is doing well. That means the products are getting shipped out. But if it starts to tank, obviously it seems like that maybe there's businesses.
Not necessarily, and this is the weirdness of the stock market is not the economy, and I really do annoy. I do hate people kind of putting the two together.
Yeah.
As a classic example, one of the most highly, most valuable stocks until quite recently was Tesla. Even though that anyone who knew anything knew that Elon Musk's Tesla was just a disaster waiting to happen. It was a car company valued like a tech stock, and again, think about his ideas in more than 10 seconds, and any engineer will point out the problems. But again, Tesla kept rising as a stock because of speculation, and again, when you do sort of first year economics, you'll get taught about the tulip bulb problem in sort of the 1600s in Netherlands, where people just speculate and they go, oh, well, it's going to be worth $100 in 2 years. So I'll buy, I'm happy to pay $90 for it. And the other guy goes, wow, well, that went high. I'm going to pay $180 for it because obviously it's going to keep rising at that rate. So there is a whole massive sections of the market that are driven by speculation. That's particularly the tech stocks end of the world. And there are other ends of the market which are just very much, driven by quarterly profits and what they're doing. People are, if you're investing in, it's like the argument, like Target, Walmart kind of stuff, that is very much going to be driven by how well they're doing in the actual market, in the real world consumer market. If you're investing in Tesla or, medical technology companies, that is really going to be speculating on how well they're going to be doing on future products they might do in the future, or, licenses they might have coming up. The stock market is completely different and quite often completely disconnected from the real world. Where, there have been times where on the same day you can have Americans reach new levels of inequality at the same time as the stock market does it better than ever before. So, that's different. Biden's actually done pretty well on this term. The lowest percentage of the United States people living paycheck to paycheck shrunk. That's been a really good thing to see. But definitely it's still upwards mobility and income inequality is still quite high in the United States.
Yeah, we know this. we try to push this all the time, but the thing is you'll always get the argument is if people live paycheck to paycheck, you'll have one side that says, oh, well, you just need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. They use the old Ronald Reagan argument essentially, but that's not how it works, because where you live, the cost of living, the groceries, where you work at, it all kind of plays in together. And I always try to stress this as much as humanly possible. But people are like, oh, well, you know what? If you're not happy where you live, you can always pick up and move. It's like, dude, that costs fucking money to move. Holy shit. But, it's just there's not nearly as many social safety nets here in the United States as there are in places like Australia. You and I have talked about this in great detail. Because here's a good example. I mean, I don't want to tell them this too much, but it's you talk about public transportation. If you don't feel like driving to work where you live, you can just wait for the bus because it comes by every 15 minutes and you can get on that bus and it'll take you to work and you've got nothing to worry about. There are very, very few cities like that we can afford to have that, because there's rural parts of the United States where nobody relies on public transportation. So if people have to get to work, they have to rely on somebody else to get them to work. Now, there is a method of public transportation where I live, but it's predominantly geared towards people that are elderly. Like that way they can like get on this and they can go to the grocery store, get what they need, and then just kind of come right on back. But not
that's because they vote.
But like the thing is, not every city has this, honestly. And this is why I always bring stuff like this up. Everything is tied together. If your infrastructure is shit, your economy is not going to do as well. If your if the housing market, or if people are not like, if people live in paycheck to paycheck, you're not going to be able to invest in much in your economy. It is all tied together. But the reason why I was talking about when I talk about the stock market is because everyone's like freaking out about this. I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. It's not the Great Depression all over again. It's a fucking nothing burger as far as I'm concerned. That's what I want to bring up.
Well, so there's two things. First of all, weirdly enough, there is an economic metric for what we were talking about before. It's actually weirdly enough called the American Dream Index, which is effectively how easy it is for someone to rise and go up and down in economic status. Come from being poor and become rich. And the Americans used to be very high on the American Dream Index. They now dropped, if memory serves, down to like 26th, 27th on the American Dream Index, which is always hilarious to me that the Americans don't top that index. And again, it's the compounding problems. It's the, if I don't have a car, well then, I can only apply for jobs in this rural town, because there's no other way to get to other towns to work and do that. So it limits my ability to go work other places. And there's a whole, different things that could kick off from there. And economics is very much like that. It is these massive ripples and problems that you start one place and they just completely drift off and affect other areas. When it comes to the stock market, again, I always kind of tell people, look, there are time for panics, and there are a lot of people who look at lines, and I see way too many people go, well, the line is here and the line is here. Oh my God, if you extend that line at that angle, oh, it's going to be the end of the world, yada, yada, yada. Not realizing the government's there are millions of very much smarter than me people whose entire job is to look at that line every day and go, okay, how can we make it work in the right direction? Or how can we make this as stable as we possibly can? Because there will be decisions made to try and stop that happening. So when there's a bump in the market, yes, it is something to probably watch. Is it something to panic about? Not really. Like, again, even if it's the US enters a recession, people forget that we used to have recessions all the time. And again, having a small recession, dipping below, let's say a negative growth by 0.2% or 0.5% for a quarter, and then going back for another 7 years of positive, that seems like a fairly decent, decent arrangement to me. Again, most economists will always try and avoid it if they can. They tend to be wanting every economist, again, this is what they're like as people as well, will say 2 to 3%, and they will just do whatever they can to keep it at 2 to 3% growth all the time, never move. And if it goes above 2%, they'll try and slow the economy down. Also above 3, slow it down. Below 2, speed it up. And that's the entire world financial system is just keeping it in that band, or trying to at least.
Yeah. But again, that's why I kind of want to talk about it, because like I feel like people like me, we're not really educated like on stuff like this, but like I try not to read headlines. I try to read like the fine line about like who is financially responsible behind this like this. But honestly, when people were like at the beginning of the week, everyone was acting like the fucking world was about to end. I'm like,
and where are we now?
Yeah. I went to a grocery store and I spent like $75 on simple things. I mean, I saw people buying, everyone's freaking out over nothing, but I think it's just because it's sending people to a panic, and I don't like that. I just feel like the more people are educated on this, but it's just because, like you said earlier, economics is such a boring subject. Not everybody cares about it. They just read headlines and they're like freaking out.
And again, there are so many different effects that people also don't think about. So the classic example, I remember, I think it was my first or second year of economics, that a guy, one of my lecturers came in and he went, okay, look, should we, I've just made this money out of nowhere. I'm offering it to one of our states here. Let's say we'll make it for the Americans, the California Tourism Board. Should we give them $1 billion to spend on tourism stuff, because that'll drive more people in, get the economy going, boost it up, do out of nowhere, doesn't cost him any problems having that. Nothing is wrong. This isn't going to come out of any department. And obviously everyone says, yeah, $1 billion for tourism sounds great. And he just looks at us and goes, congrats, you've now just bankrupted the Arizona tourism industry. And I went, oh shit, yeah, you're right. Because that's how economics works. There is always, it's never just on and off. There's no switches. It's all sliders. It's all, you push a little bit here and then you've actually pushed something here as well. Yes, if there's reshaping in the market, we did see some, when that sort of first contraction happened in the tech stock market, that some people took that money out of tech stocks because they are more speculative and put it into safer stocks, bonds, treasuries, or even just, stuff like we talked about with Walmart that is much more driven by just consumer spending. So yes, I this is why we do what we do on the Redline, which is rather than trying to chase the breaking stories, we always tend to try and sit back and go, hey, look, let's let it sit for a week or two, because we'd rather this be an episode that you can listen to a year later and everything's still correct. Because if you just focus on the events of the day in economics, you won't learn anything. There's not enough data for that.
No, there isn't. 100%.
It can tell you where to look at other places. So for instance, if we that to me was a sign that, the market is starting to the consumer market particularly is starting to realize the volatility in tech stocks. But it's a blip of a wider trend. But is it going to be a recession? No one can really say. I mean, I'm not going to be like Michael Burry and predict he correctly predicted he correctly predicted 56 of the last 2 recessions.
I don't know who that is.
He's the guy who predicted the housing crash of 2008.
Oh, okay.
Very famous. Everyone takes him very, very seriously. And he's a very, very smart finance guy. But he always does tend to predict recession is around the corner every quarter. So it's always the joke that he's predicted 56 of the last 2 recessions.
Now I get the joke. Okay, I got you now. Awesome.
Yeah. Again, there's 4 people in the world who will laugh at that.
Yeah. I get it though. It's kind of like the joke that you've sold a Russian history book, chapter 1, the Russian history book, and then chapter 2, and then it got worse kind of deal. So.
Yes, really should have bought that book. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I always tell people that it is, don't panic at the small stories, because with economics, nothing is ever day to day.
No.
Even we talk about the 2008 recession. Now we think back at the 2008 recession. We think about how it all happened and it all seems so quick. But when you actually look at the timeline of things, it was kind of a slow cascade. Obviously, there was the big drops in the stock market days. But the whole, no one goes and watches the 9 o'clock report and then fires half their staff at 9:05. It's the slow problems that come, they fire the staff 2 months later, and those staff don't, end up going to the restaurant anymore because, they don't have the money to do so. And the restaurant then goes, bro, that's how economics works. It's much slower than what people tend to think it is, particularly macroeconomics. Micro, I don't care. Well,
macro. Just for clarification, when it comes down to micro and macroeconomics, what's kind of the difference between the two?
I mean, they're both the same kind of concepts, but you find microeconomics will focus mostly on individual businesses, individual projects, individual things. Mm-hmm. Macro tends to look much wider at the economy, much more, what is the next 10-year trend of this? Or, what industries are as a whole are going to do. It's much broader, much larger, a lot more data. So, your micro guys will tell your business, hey, you should, they'll tell a small to medium business, you should increase wages by 12%, whereas a macro guy will tell you the entire market's going to move by 3% positively. Okay. They're both just as boring as each other, though.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that, but it's I feel like the more people learn about stuff like this, maybe they might not panic nearly as much, but, it's the United States. We panic about everything. Let's just put it this way. I mean, you could say, oh my God, a person that might be from the Middle East might have committed a crime. Oh my fucking God, holy shit. We start panicking over, the slightest thing. I mean, I really wish our country didn't scare so easily, but we are professional scared people, I swear. I mean, I try not to take myself down that route, but it's just I don't know.
I'll give her a piece of advice. I can't remember who told me to do it years ago, and he said, go just take taking a couple of hours and go pick random days in the news and just watch the news from like 10 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever it is, and just watch an episode and realize that how many of the stories that seemed absolutely important at the time, who gives a shit? Like they really weren't nearly as big a problem as anyone thought they would be. So many, I see this all the time on kind of geopolitics YouTube, of people putting out these massive stories that this is the end of the thing. This is the, and then you actually think, well, you come back to it 6 months later, you're like, well, that was nothing. All the good, the really experienced guys knew it was going to be nothing, but that doesn't get any clicks. It's I feel like I way too often get invited onto programs or do interviews or whatnot. And get a classic example. I did one recently where they brought me on to talk about how Russia wasn't invited to military exercises in Central Asia. And I went, well, yeah, that's pretty standard. Russia's busy, and you don't invite them if you would have quietly asked them, do you want to be part of it? They would have said, no, we're busy. And you were, okay, well, we're not going to invite you then. That's how it works. And the disappointment of like, oh, okay, that's it. I'm like, yeah, no, there's no story here. Like, I'm sorry, but that makes terrible television. I get it makes terrible television. So this is unfortunately when you have finance and economics guys, they're stuck in this position that to be interesting or to get called back or actually justify their position, they have to be exciting and bold and say things, and none of this is very exciting. No one wants to bring the guy on television to go, this is within our economic modeling. We expect this is probably going to continue in this trend. We might see a slight bump in Q3 if we don't see the recession rise by about 12. No one can want like the eyeball. Even look, I love that stuff. Eyeball with that guy. So I understand the problem the US has. I don't know how to fix it though.
Honestly, I'm an American. I don't know how to fix it either. I try to try to pull people back from the death, but they don't want to fucking listen to me. So.
You and me will just start doing thumbnails where we go, oh my God, recession, not recession. This is normal.
Oh my God.
We'll just shock thumbnails at all times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They go for the shock factor.
Someone wrote a great economics paper a while ago looking at YouTube thumbnails and seeing how they correlate with, up and downs in the finance market of like how many like shocked faces I remember reading the abstract of it going, this is the most weird paper, and I have to read it at some point, but I don't know why that crossed my mind.
Oh, I think we've kind of killed this topic though. So you ready? Did you have anything like a different topic you want to bring on, or did you want me to just go on to my next topic?
Fire away, go with the next topic.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So in 2022, the PACT Act was being brought in. Like, for those not aware, the PACT Act was basically to where soldiers like myself were exposed to toxic burn pits because for some fucking reason we think it's a great idea to just burn everything and everything inside of pits, inside of FOBs, which are forward operating bases. We thought that was a great idea, but the thing is we didn't realize, and we probably should have, is that these burn pits were causing like respiratory illnesses. Now, a little bit quick story about myself. When I was in Afghanistan in 2010, we had our own little fire base, our own little slice of heaven on Fob Wilson, which was in Kandahar area, out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. And there was an operation that was going on where we had to they gave us some pre-planned targets, but the thing was, like, these pre-planned targets, they were afraid that it was going to hit something called a J-lens balloon. A J-lens balloon is basically a giant Zeppelin-looking thing in the sky that has like a camera that can see out for miles around. They were afraid our howitzers were going to hit this area. So, long story short, even though we said we weren't going to hit that balloon, they didn't believe us, so they moved us within 100 meters of this so-called burn pit. Okay, so the PACT Act is basically supposed to give us coverage. Now, I have service connection to that recently. I don't have a percentage for that, but the fact that it's service connected means I am covered in the event that I actually develop more health issues, which I'm pretty sure is going to happen. However, I'm not talking about the burn pits, okay? This is what I'm talking about, though, okay? So, years ago when I was in Germany, good God. Years ago when I was in Georgia, they both come with a G, so I was in Georgia and I was doing chores around the house. You put on an episode talking about Uzbekistan. Okay? Now, why am I talking about Uzbekistan, okay? Because in this episode, you talked about how during the days of the USSR, now, you can correct me afterwards, the USSR during the days of the Cold War, they were trying to find new ways to develop nuclear weapons. They were using Uzbekistan as a, test site to build radioactive weapons, essentially. At the collapse of the USSR, though, they abandoned the facility. However, the radiation, in that area remains. Now, it's affected the climate, it's affected the flora and the fauna of that area. It's affected, and with climate change kind of coming to this, it's affected the entire area where people cannot use that area whatsoever because it's so highly radioactive. Now, why are these two things tied together? Because the Pact Act actually covers service members that went to a place called K2, which is called Karshi Khanabad. I probably butchered that. I am sorry. But it's a camp. It's called Camp Stronghold Freedom. It's a Soviet air base that's used by the U.S. Army, the Air Force, and the Marine Forces for support missions into Afghanistan. Now, we're out of Afghanistan right now. I don't know if there's anybody there right now. But the thing is, though, there are service members that have found themselves subjected to things like jet fuel, that's standard procedures, volatile organic compounds, particulate matter and dust, depleted uranium they try to utilize, asbestos, and lead-based paint. Now, here's why I think this is an interesting topic to talk about. Because I'm trying to see if there's like a correlation. Because you talked about how Uzbekistan was utilized as a testing ground for radioactive materials and how that could have somewhat of a drastic effect. Because radioactive material does not just stay in one area. It travels like everything else, essentially. Now, climate change playing into it, but Uzbekistan being like a testing ground for radioactive materials, nuclear weapons and whatnot, is there like a correlation, and should people be concerned about something like this?
So I think there's a couple of stories that I think have kind of molded over one another. So there's a few issues to kind of go through. So we'll go to nuclear and we'll do biological next. With the nuclear issues, the big problem, effectively, Kazakhstan became the testing ground for most of the Soviets' nuclear weapons. Again, because most of Kazakhstan is absolutely sparse and empty. So towns like Semipalatinsk in the north have been massive radiation dumps. And there are parts of Kazakhstan which are completely off limits because they are just absolutely irradiated. Even today, the Russian space program mostly operates out of Baikonur, which is in sort of southwestern Kazakhstan, because it was out of range of most US spy planes. And it was also just in the middle of nowhere. So there are definitely areas of the country that are radiated. Now, how radiated? That's really interesting. So radiation, I think people do misunderstand a little bit, because radiation is not just I touch something radioactive, I die. It is, how much radiation, how long you're exposed to it for. It's the reason that the guy that does your X-ray will wear, a lead sheet, but you're fine. It's because you're getting a small dose, you're getting a high dose for a small amount of time. He doesn't want to get 1 million doses of that. There's an equation in this. So for instance, when, I spent a day in the Chernobyl, factory, in the Chernobyl factories and in the Chernobyl hospitals and those kind of places, the radiation I would have taken on that day, yes, is much higher than I probably would want to do all every day, but it's about the same as about 12 hours of flying. And I fly quite a lot, so it's not huge, what it is. So the radiation is not usually the problem unless you're going to be digging around some pits in Semipalatinsk and a few other places. The big concern, we'll come to Karshi as well. Karshi is still operated, it's the largest air base in Uzbekistan. It's kind of in the south, in the middle of nowhere. And yes, it's still the main base of the Uzbek Air Force. Still quite a large facility as well. And yes, it was poorly maintained, and the Soviets, did leave chemicals and everything else all around. The big concern in that area, if you go west of Karshi, so you're talking up towards Karakalpakstan, towards Nukas, Moynak, those kind of areas, is an area that used to be called Rosvosdenie, which effectively, for Call of Duty fans, is what Rebirth Island is based on. Resurrection Island is roughly the translation. This is the area where the Soviets used to do most of the testing for biological weapons, smallpox, viruses, everything and anything. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it was chaotic, and people do not realize how chaotic all this was, that effectively you had towns that were completely just existing because of the fact the Soviets were building weapons there or doing whatever they were. And then overnight, the Soviets just leave. They did clean out most of the stuff, but one of the major problems they've had with Vostrostenia is that particularly the biological monkeys they were testing on, they were just dumping in the Aral Sea because it was too difficult to get rid of them. It's not really a problem. Let's just dump it in the sea. And again, it's because there's also a lot of corruption in that area. It was a lot of, hey, we'll pay you $1,000 to get rid of this properly, and they'll pocket the 500 and dump it in the sea. That's, again, not a problem with the Aral Seas there. The Aral Sea is now shrinking, and you're finding a lot of these areas, a lot of these sort of corpses and whatnot that were in Vosforos are now coming out into the desert, into the open air, and blowing into the air. Now, the Americans actually did come in the early 90s and actually do some good work trying to help the Uzbeks to properly clean the area, and most of it's been demolished. There's not a lot left of Vostrostenia. Almost every building's been taken down, and the guys that did a great job, effectively, working in the middle of the desert in hazmat suits. The Russians very much did help as well, but the Americans looked at the Russians and went, "You've got so many problems at the moment. I think you might need a bit of a hand." And again, I think that was the right thing to do. So yes, we, watching cancer rates, particularly in sort of the very west of Kazakhstan and the very west of Uzbekistan, go up around this area, much higher than sort of the statistical average. But it's not. It depends on your exposure time. If you've flown through Uzbekistan, you've flown through Kashi for a day, probably not a huge problem. If you live and breathe and grow your food in Kazakhstan, it does push you at a higher risk. So it is a time exposed versus how much exposure. You could, you get the same dose of radiation by hugging the elephant's foot in Chernobyl as you would from maybe living. If you a minute hugging the elephant's foot might be the same as 30 years living within a couple of Ks of it. It just depends on time and radiation. So it's a very complicated answer to say. It's a problem. It's probably not as big a problem as people think it is, except if you live out in Kazakhstan.
Okay, but this is the reason why I brought this up is because obviously, excuse you. So it's sort of like if I was to land at a base in we'll say Kandahar Airfield, right, and I'm exposed to a burn pit out there. If I'm only out there for a day, then obviously, yes, I'm not going to have long-term effects. But, however, if I stay in this area, because this burn pit that we were at, that we're subject to in Bob Wilson, it was 3 howitzer sections of 7 people that would rotate every 12 hours at this location for about a month. So it's this constant exposure that we are subjected to in regards to this. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because, depending on your location, the closer you are, the more you're exposed to these toxic chemicals that are essentially, because like I said, we burned everything. Okay. And this was, and I had a concern about this, not just because of the fact that we were so close to it, because we were so exposed to everything else. Because on our artillery fire base, you're supposed to be segregated from everybody else. I was okay with that. But then when they moved us out, I was like, okay, what the fuck are we doing here? But now the reason why I'm bringing this up as far as K2 is concerned, it's because they have all these different things that people might be subjected to. Okay, jet fuel, not a big deal. Okay, depleted uranium, now you're going into scary territory. But then when I start thinking about places that might have radioactive material kind of leaking into it, I feel now you've got a real serious problem because, let's talk about Vietnam, for example. They were exposing people to Agent Orange, and people were feeling it was probably a generational effect, but people were suffering those genuine reasons, especially, people that were stationed there, if they were service members. And if, let's say, for example, the DoD says, it's just jet fuel, it's just depleted uranium. Do you feel they have regarding radioactive testing and whatnot? Do you think that they might have a legitimate cases of why they're being exposed to shit like this, or is it just stuff like this?
It's again a complicated one, and I want to stress I'm not a doctor, and this is only going off times I've looked into this as a subject before. The depleted uranium issue, we'll go through that first. The depleted uranium, it sounds a lot scarier than it is. Now, effectively, what depleted, the best way I can kind of explain how depleted uranium shells work is Yeah, imagine you you're picking a bowl of M&Ms, but the brown ones are the ones that are like have the power. They're the really good bits of the M&Ms, and you only want the brown ones. So you go through this bowl of M&Ms, you pick out all the brown ones, but you now have a bowl of like no brown M&Ms left. Now the brown bits, the M&Ms, are the enriched uranium. That is effectively making the uranium more potent. That's what you use for power. And then if you really want to enrich it, you go for the weapons and everything else. The bowl of M&Ms that doesn't have the brown in it, which is not nearly as effective and not nearly as good, that's what you use for depleted uranium. So it's not actually that radioactive. I wouldn't want it in my water systems. I wouldn't want to, dunk it in my coffee, but we're talking very low exposure levels and very low problems with it. It's just the reason they use them is that, funnily enough, if you want to go fire these things, they are very good armor piercing rounds. They're very good at what they do. And the only other option you can use is, memory says it's tungsten would be the other option, which is actually more toxic to people and also much more expensive. So, depleted uranium sounds a lot scarier than it actually is. When it goes to exposure to chemicals at, particularly at K2, K2 is fairly safe. There wasn't a lot of Soviet, testing around that area. Phosphorus is, quite far away from K2. Uzbekistan's a lot bigger than people think it is. If you were to look at Soviet units that were deployed, let's say around Semipalatinsk or Petropavl or those kind of places, yeah, those guys should probably be getting tested. Anyone in Chelyabinsk is probably going to be needing to get tested. And if you've just flown through K2, very low levels of exposure and very low time exposed to it. Again, most of these facilities are still, occupied by Uzbek staff today. And if K2 is the biggest airbase still. So it's not a huge thing. But when it comes to, let's say, the burn pits, just saying, hey, I was only exposed for a little bit doesn't also mean that you can't go anything wrong. You can effectively go hug the elephant's foot, or, that's probably a bad example, but you can go very much be exposed to radiation. It doesn't guarantee cancer. It just increases the chance of cancer. So, rather than having a 1 in 100,000 chance of getting cancer, I spent 2 years drinking puddles in Chernobyl, and now I have a 1 in 6. It's like, that's a big jump up, but it is not guaranteed. But it also means that if you go from 1 in 10,000 to 2 in 10,000, you still technically doubled your chances. It's, it's very low still, but still technically doubled your chances. So again, there's not a hard and fast rule. And this is what is really difficult because, there are so many particularly cases from burn pits where people, with chemical warfare in particular, where, they probably actually were, that was the problem. But it is easy to say that it could be anything that caused that problem. So, it's, unless you're looking at their medical records, I don't think you can make a complete blanket judgment. But it's a complicated issue.
It really is, because the thing is, like, when it came down to the PACT Act, I actually had to talk about where I was, and I had to give specific examples about this, because I'm sure there are some people out there that feel like that they were subjected to things like burn pits or jet fuels, and there's probably some places where they might have been able to justify this. But it's when it comes down to filing claims, you have to be very, very specific, essentially. Now, some people might say, oh, well, they might like make something up. I'm not saying that happens, but it's possible. But the thing is like, you have to be very specific when filing a claim like this. And that's why I was able to get the service connection, because like the burn pits I was subjected to. But again, like the reason why I'm heartened to seeing so much on this is because, and I'm so glad that you brought this up, I wasn't sure if like radioactivity like had anything to do with it. Like if the weapons testing that they did in Uzbekistan has any effect on this, but you've pretty much like answered that question, which is something I kind of appreciate. But like, what do you think like some people might find themselves like, because when you talked about like what was going on with those nuclear radiation testing and whatnot, like what are some of the effects that some people like felt essentially from all this? Like what was like the short-term and long-term effects?
So again, a lot of this will be really subtle, like, and it is, it really depends on where you are. So, what you do tend to find in Vosros is our example here, that things like bowel cancer are higher than the statistical average. Let's say if 1 in every 20,000 Uzbeks get bowel cancer in, stuff north of Moynak, south of Moynak, you're probably going to get, 1 in 2,000 gets it. It's much statistically higher. Doesn't mean everyone gets it, just means it is higher. You also get radiation tends to be odd where it is. So I remember, when you drive from when you go towards Chernobyl, back before it became a tourist thing, because I went years ago, so you had to get permission from the military to go in. You get your Geiger counter, you sort of test it in Kiev, and it's, I remember it bouncing out at around 1.8, which is, again, a lot higher than you think it's going to be. And I asked my contact, going, what's going on? He goes, oh, Kiev's full of marble. It is just generally a bit higher than what you think it's going to be. Well, okay. Then you get to parts, and we can be less than a K away from the actual sarcophagus, and it's like 1.2. It's lower than Kiev. But then you get across random patches where the Geiger counter just spikes up, or you'll get to a manhole cover and it just spikes up. So radiation is also not, blanket. It's not stable. It can be pockets of stuff. It really is completely, undefinable. And it also is a lot of people kind of talk about, that quote from the Chernobyl series, which I thought was great. It was like 3.6, not good, not great. And people go, 3.6 and freak out. 3.6 is bad. Yes. When you're exposed long-term to it. Eating a banana, I keep reminding people, eating a banana actually gives you the same radiation as, about 10 minutes in Chernobyl, or about, 4 hours of flying or whatever it is.
Really?
Bananas have radiation in them. Go out in the sun. Australia tends to have higher radiation levels because we used to sit under a lower part of the ozone level, which is why a lot of Australians get skin cancer at a much higher rate than the average population does.
Did not know that.
There are lots of sort of, again, macroeconomic kind of stuff where it is, you don't have this like, you went here and you got radiation. I mean, yes, at very high doses, guys who, like those Brazilian kids who played with the plutonium powder or also the cesium powder, or people who in Chernobyl right there, at exposed area, they got a massive dose at a prolonged period, they're dead. That's what it is. There are still people who live and have lived near Chernobyl for 30 years. And they're going to have higher than average statistical cancer rates, but it doesn't mean they're dead. There's no hard and fast rule, unfortunately. Unless you are, dealing with cesium powder, in which case, good luck.
Yeah, and it's interesting to bring that up because, here in the United States, there are people live in low-income areas, and what tends to happen is they tend to drop off. You got major corporations that will drop off massive mountains of asbestos that travels, and then you got people that live on the outskirts of Chicago, where they are actually living above how do I put this? They're basically living above massive amounts of lead, which leads to increases in cancer and whatnot. That's why it's important for us to kind of recognize that this is a problem. And again, this is the reason why bringing awareness to this issue is really essential. Because even though, let's say I live next to Asbestos Mountain, I may not get cancer from Asbestos Mountain, but Joe Snuffy that lives down the street from me, that guy's been living, him and I have been living there at the same time, but because him and I, he's the same distance, somehow he's got cancer and it's linked to Asbestos Mountain essentially. And maybe I just feel I don't know, maybe a little fucked up or something like that, but I feel like this is an issue that's not properly addressed or something. Now the Asbestos Mountain can be moved away, but areas like in Uzbekistan where the radiation level, radiation, if I'm not mistaken, where especially with testing, it takes about 50 to 100 years for that to kind of clear out, doesn't it?
It really depends on the concentration and what it is. So, for instance, the bomb we dropped on Chernobyl, on Hiroshima, there's almost no radiation left from that. It's why it's a very habitable town today. Most places that bombs have been dropped, you can stand in the crater and there's no problem. Bigger bombs, there might be some problems. The radiation definitely goes up. It's waste, nuclear waste in particular, is the problem. Because rather than having, when a bomb goes off, you get a huge dose of radiation all at once, and then it kind of it dissipates from there. There'll always be some, but the half-life's very short. When you have radioactive waste, though, or you have just waste product, that's when there's it's a lower level of radiation, but it keeps ticking along. Rather than having, adding 100 to the scoreboard and then never adding any more, it adds 3 points to the scoreboard every day, which is just going to keep building up. And that's those are the areas that are far more problematic. And this is the trouble that the US have had for years. So what to do with the radioactive waste? Because there's two different levels. There's kind of your feed water that's been through the machines, and it's a bit higher than what it should be. And I wouldn't want to have it near a kid in kindergarten, but not the end of the world. And then there's like the proper in the middle of the reactor, like depleted rods that touch it and like, congrats, you've just tripled the amount of cancer you could get over the long term. They're problematic areas, the problematic items. What do you do with that? The United States built an entire nuclear waste facility years ago. I can't remember the name of the mountain because it's so early in the morning. And built it, got it ready to go, and then the Nevada State Assembly said no. And unfortunately, now it sits in warehouses, which are not properly secured.
Yeah.
Russia's got a lot of the same problems. That's a big concern. So the fortunate thing, though, is the areas that most of this testing or the nuclear waste sites were positioned. Yes, there'll be some that are nuclear waste disposal sites that are close to city or closer to cities. The Americans don't tend to do that. The Russians do tend to do that. But they tend to do the lower level stuff. A classic example in the Tajikistan, there's a town, second biggest city in the country is called Khojand. There's a nuclear waste facility right near right near the town's water supply, but it's the lower level stuff. So it's slightly more problematic. It's not the end of the world. When it comes to the high level stuff, the stuff you're going to bring out in very enriched products, Chelyabinsk, those kind of places, then I would never want to put that anywhere near civilians. And the Americans have been pretty good about that. When the high level stuff comes in, it's all going to go in a warehouse in some crazy isolated desert in the middle of Nevada somewhere. But with the areas that they tested these things, where they kept dropping bombs, most of them are pretty fine, or they're in the middle of absolutely nowhere. I'm talking like there wouldn't be a house for 300 miles. And that's why they do it out there. And it's why the testing usually happens in the United States, Bikini Atoll, middle of the Pacific, Nevada, New Mexico, those kind of places. For the British, it used to be Australia, middle of nowhere. The French used to do it on their Pacific Islands quite often. You put it way away from your population most of the time.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. I mean, it's just like... that's why I kind of want to talk about it, though. It's like where the risk might be involved with stuff like this, but it's just like all the same. It's just,
the boring answer is it depends.
It really does. But the thing is like it's better to know instead of like kind of second guess it, because like where I first heard about this, like where service members were subjected to stuff was actually Jon Stewart, not the DoD.
Yes.
Jon Stewart has been a huge advocate on this, and only recently the DoD fortunately the Veterans Affairs actually came out with this. That's been added to the PACT Act, but the first time I heard about this was actually from Jon Stewart, because he's been such a staunch advocate for service members, because he's one of the reasons as to why the PACT Act was passed. Same thing with the first responders for 9/11, because he shamed Congress to doing the right thing. I mean, this is why I love Jon Stewart, honestly, because he doesn't do things. He doesn't do this to like make himself feel good. It's because he knows this is the right thing to do, and
it is, and it absolutely should be. And I think the best way forward is what a lot of the Australian military does it quite often. Is if you are, let's say you have been working with chemicals, or you're in chemical warfare units, or you've done something where you are at a higher risk of these kind of concerns, they will just make sure like you get tested far more often. And again, a lot of this stuff is, hey, look, you've got cancer, we got it much earlier. And there is that incentive to go test more and really make sure we can get to this early. It doesn't mean that everyone, if you ever spent time on an American nuclear sub, you are going to be radiated. It just means you should probably get tested a bit more. I think that's the first place to start. And again, there are some people who are going to be affected by this. Some people who, even if their chances went from 2 in 600,000 to 4 in 600,000, that's still doubling your chances. There are problems that come with this, but it's Jon Stewart did really good work on this one, and it is
fantastic.
Watching McConnell slink by him, it was just such a gutless. I've never seen such a smug look from John, just being like, he knew that because McConnell did not want to make eye contact. He knew that this, I still have no idea how the GOP did not go for that one. It seems like such a slam dunk bit of legislation of
it really does.
9/11 responders and troops.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, they always make excuses. They say, "Oh, well, we have to make sure there's plenty of legislation, there's plenty of funding in there." They're full of shit. And the fact is like, anytime they say, "Oh, there was pork barrel spending," no, there wasn't. And I ask people when they say that, it's like, okay, did you read the fucking bill? I did. There was no pork barrel spending. The fact that many advocacy groups, let alone 365 burn pits, grunt style, all these different veterans projects helped write the damn bill. There was no pork barrel spending because they said, "Hey, listen, if this is not going to fund veterans specifically, we don't approve of this." It's as simple.
And again, in the bill, it wasn't even that controversial. It wasn't like everyone who's ever touched a burn pit is going to get a Ferrari. It was, hey, we should probably test it. We should probably do what a lot of other militaries do: test more. And if you have something that tends to come up at a higher statistical average, so let's say you were operating near Semipalatinsk or one of these places, and yes, you're in a town where all the locals that also live there tend to get bowel cancer at a higher rate. Then you get bowel cancer at a higher rate. You go, okay, yeah, that's probably that. There's a chance that one was us. We'll cover that. Yeah. Like, get tested, get to it early. Because again, this is what I keep stressing to people: is if you can get to cancer early enough, there's a huge chance that you can get, a much better chance of fighting it off. And unfortunately, in a privatized medical system, you tend not to test yourself as much.
No.
Which is why, this is the problem. This is one of the kind of oddities of the American system, is that you have people don't get tested until they feel sick, and by that point you're stage 3, 4, and it's over.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just want to get tested and you think it's fine, you might be able to get it when it's stage 1 or much earlier. And again, that was what the problem. That was the point of that act. So yeah, it was. I have no idea why it became a controversial one. It should have been a slam dunk for both sides.
100%. It definitely should have been a slam dunk. I don't want to cut this short, but I know your time is really, really, really short right now. But I just have one more question before we actually close these things out. There were some other topics I want to talk to you about, but people are losing their mind, and with the election coming around, people wondering who should we vote for, because the world is basically falling apart. But because people are talking about oh, China is pressing on Taiwan, Russia and Ukraine. I'm not going to mention the other region because I promised I wouldn't mention it. But people are wondering what is it how much of an effect is it especially future U.S. politics? How much of an effect do they actually have on all these different regions around the world? And if people are and you being Australian, and you're watching the American people. And I'm not saying that, I'm not asking you to endorse anybody, but it's just how much of an impact is it that we, the American people, actually have on all these, because we're not involved in any of these wars. Yeah, we might be funding, one region and we're funding another region kind of deal. But what it exactly, let's take Ukraine and Russia, for example, right? I always say, listen, we got to keep supporting Ukraine because they're the ones that were invaded. Let alone the fact that now that they are actually on the offensive now in places in Russia, I feel like it's important that we continue to support them, because that way, and I talked about this in great detail about how if Ukraine doesn't get what they want, Zelensky's be the biggest loser. However, if they do get what they want, then he's going to come out the winner. So basically my question is geopolitically, what are the biggest concerns we should have, and what should we continue to support Ukraine? Should we continue to or should we just kind of stay out of and just kind of let the cards fall as they place, be isolationist as the orange dictator wants us to be, essentially?
A lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Yes, so the American elections absolutely affect everyone. It is, you guys are more militarily powerful than Rome at the top of Rome. It was. If you didn't live in Rome, Rome still affected you even during that period of time. Mm-hmm. So there is a reason why, less than 30% of Australians know who our deputy prime minister is, effectively our version of vice president. Yet you go to any bar in Australia and people, Maricopa County is mostly, has a high Latino population. We expect it to probably go to the Democrats. And, everyone watches the American elections incredibly closely, and everyone is trying to make sure it goes the way that, their country wants it to go. Some countries have incentives to make the Republicans win, and others have incentives to make the Democrats win. I hate this trope and I hate that people use it, but unfortunately, I think it might be true for this election, that this election is probably the most important in the American, in at least the last 50 years. Because there are so many pinch points coming up in over the next sort of 4 years. For Taiwan, there is this massive problem everyone's been waiting for 2027, 28, where effectively the Taiwan Navy grows at a pretty steady rate. China's is hitting that point where it is, yes, it's been putting on massive amounts of naval ships quite recently, but now they're reaching the tipping point where rather than being able to just keep growing the Navy at this rate, they now need to start spending part of that naval budget to repair the ships they made at the start of this ramp up. So that is probably the biggest thing going to get. If they, from that point onwards, where they have to keep repairing the boats they've made, they're effectively, they're going to remain fairly steady whilst Taiwan grows and whilst the United States grows. Now you reach a point where the Chinese will have it in their mind that it's now or never. This is the time to do it. If we don't do it, every year after that gets worse for us to position-wise. That's why, for Taiwan, this is important. For Ukraine, this is incredibly important as well. Frankly, if so much of our, general system of power, system of everything effectively works on the fact that we've had peace in the world. We've actually made massive economic gains by where we came to at the start of this conversation through economics and working together. When the oranges were wiped out in Florida, rather than just not having oranges, we have a world trade system that allows us to go, okay, well, Argentina can make oranges for a couple of months. That only works because we've been in a very, very peaceful position since about 45. Again, I say peaceful. There's been lots of wars. There's wars going on right now, but I'm talking considering pre-45 to now, it's, major powers don't tend to go to war. One of the massive principles of that entire system has been that we do not change borders by aggression. Mm-hmm. That's just the way. And again, there are lots of controversies with that. There are, particularly in Africa and the Balkans, a lot of lines drawn on the map that are not what they should be. But we also know that by the lines staying where they are and lines only changing through referendums, peace deals, whatever you want to do, that it doesn't give anyone incentives to do it. And this is the trouble that everyone's been watching is if Russia got away with this, they took half of Ukraine and everyone just went, what are you going to do? Algeria, Morocco, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Iran, Azerbaijan, Iraq, Kurdistan, Syria, Israel, Egypt, Libya, all of those guys, just off the top of my head, Serbia, the Balkans, all of those guys off the top of my head, all have incentives and they all would go, oh, we can change the border. We could do this. Ooh, and they all start to rearm. And then once you start arming one side, then the other side starts arming, and you end up in these conflicts. And you have conflicts kick off. Because right now everyone goes, well, what's the point in invading? What would be the point in invading my Bosnia? Because I know the Americans are going to come push me back over the border anyway. And that's actually what's kept a massive amount of peace is knowing that, well, war, I can't achieve this goal through war. Not worth my time. I'm not going to go to war. If that system disappears or that collapses, God help us all. Because we not only have everyone go, okay, I no longer trust putting my supply chain across lots of countries, and I no longer trust you relying on trade. So everyone's economies go down, which then breeds instability, which again, you start seeing the spiraling effect kick off. For what the Americans have spent in Ukraine, it's had, built up the American arms industry to the point where it's a massive jobs program for the United States. And there's a reason why most of your armament factories are in the swing states, or a good chunk of them. It's also made your guys, again, getting from 30 kilometers an hour to 70 kilometers an hour, very difficult. Getting from 60 to 70, much easier. And now you guys have an arms industry that is much more scalable if, let's say, there were a war with China. There are reasons why, for instance, some of the Ukraine funding that submarine torpedoes have been included in it, which Ukraine doesn't have any submarines, so you can get the factories up and running. The Americans have spent bugger all in the grand scheme of things. And unlike, I think it's perfectly fine if you're the British or you're the Poles or you're the Bulgarians to complain about, some things with this war. If you've given away your javelins as Britain, congrats, you now need to buy new javelins. If you've given away your javelins as the United States, congrats, you just employed 4 more people inside a swing state to build more javelins. Jobs program. This is the unique position the United States is in. You've paid bugger all money. You've effectively united NATO to, and again, we were all having conversations about what the point of NATO was just a few years ago. You've caused massive damage to the Russian military to the point where their offensive capacity is blunted. This is, even if Russia walks away from this with, Novorossiya or whatever they want to, go and get, they are nowhere near the power they once were. You've eliminated one of your major rivals for spending bugger all of money. This is an amazing deal for the Americans. The interesting thing will be if it leaves, one of a couple of things happens. Either the entire European defense sector goes haywire, and we panic, Ukraine gets annexed, and there's problems. That's the worst case scenario. There's a peace deal, maybe just, it ends up in a stalemate, effectively what it was pre-2014 or pre-2022. Yep, that's problematic because it gives Russia time to build up again. It just kind of snooze buttons the whole issue. Or Europe builds up their defenses. That's a possibility. But again, the Europeans got huge issues. Even the basic concept when you talk to European commanders of, okay, let's make an EU army. They go, let's do it. And you go, what language should they talk in? And you go, shit, because you can't do the English because no, the French won't allow it. You can't do Italian because who wants, no. You can't do German because there's no way the Polish and the French are going to want to speak German. So, problems that will come up immediately. The Americans' entire system, the fact we have such great trade, the fact the Americans are able to set up factories and work and trade with Europe and have this massive consumer market that consumes American goods, which employs so many Americans, is because we have peace. It's because we have a system where people can go, oh, okay, well, I feel confident that Europe's going to be pretty stable. I'm going to build a factory in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, knowing that the market will be there and knowing that I will keep making money for 20 years. If Europe looks like an unstable continent, people will stop investing and you start seeing a retrenchment, you start seeing trade disappear. And again, a lot of things that keep countries from stopping attacking each other is the trade. Again, I talk Central Asia far too much, but if you're Tajikistan and Uzbekistan have had lots of qualms over the years, the both of them go, as much as Tajikistan might hate them, they go, yeah, but Uzbekistan's the majority of our trade routes, so we should probably not go to war with them. And trade keeps the peace. The best thing we could ever do for a society, for children, if you are an anti-war candidate, if you are all the isolationist reasons I hear from these people are, we need to be strong, we need to be sovereign, and we need to be anti-war. If you actually are anti-war, the best thing you can do is to support Ukraine and make sure we don't end up in lots of little wars. Because once we break that norm, once we break that rule of, do not change borders by aggression, Pandora's box is open and we return to effectively the chaos of, the pre-1940s era.
Wow. I've never really thought about it like that before, but it's just like, it's like I said, and every time I talk to you, I feel like I'm always like learning something new, and it's just like that wealth of knowledge. Because I think people just, I think it's because like here in the United States, we take that for granted. We're like, oh, well, this is not our problem. Why should we take issue with it? And I think you've like just summed that out like articulately, because if we just said, fuck it, Ukraine, you're on your own kind of deal. Everybody says, okay, you're right, Ukraine, you're on your own. And then Russia basically says, okay, we're just going to take it over essentially. Next, we're going to move on to the next location. And people say, oh, that's never going to happen. We also said that Russia's never going to invade Ukraine, and look what they did. I mean, this is the thing.
The other thing I will point out to people as well, and they go, oh, well, America doesn't need to be here. When Trump pulled out of the Kurdish positions in Kurdistan, the Russians occupied those positions so quickly that the Cokes in the fridge were still cold. Like, this is the thing, that the Americans leaving a country or leaving an area of influence will not mean that area just becomes independent. It will mean that it will fall under the influence of someone else. And I don't know about you. I have lots of criticisms about the United States. I'm not, just one of those the US, America strong kind of guys. But I also have, spent a lot of time in China and Russia over the years, and I would probably prefer to, operate under free market capitalism and what we do under the kind of trade system we have at the moment, then I would under the Russian system. And again, lots of things I can say nice about the Russian system too.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who are, we should be isolationist and only worry about our own policies, might not be saying that when Europe goes and, okay, well, we're going to move our economy to benefit China now, and the Americans lose out, and they go, well, why is everyone doing that? Because you've given up the position. You can't dictate what everyone's going to have for dinner if you're not sitting at the table.
Yeah, 100%. So anyway, I feel like we could talk for hours, but the thing is, like, I know your time is very, very short right now, and it's getting late for me as well. So, but before we go, Michael, feel free to give yourself like another plug, and feel free to let everybody know when they can find you and like what your YouTube channel is and stuff like that, and where else they can find you.
Of course. So you can check us out on the Redline. We're on most your, Spotify, YouTube, Apple, all the kind of conventional stuff. If you want to check me out on Twitter, I'm on at Michael Hilliard Oz. Oz in Australia. Generally the Redline is a program. We take one big subject each fortnight and do big 90-minute deep dive, effectively getting experts in who are ambassadors, generals, very, very senior people who are experts on that subject, to come in and give us a full, really, really deep run there. Effectively, the show was created, so you could walk in knowing almost nothing about a subject and walk out with enough knowledge that the taxi driver will think you know what you're talking about. That's what the show is. So if you want to check that out, you can check that out. But again, I'm just happy to be here, always happy to chat. And Alex always throws incredibly interesting questions at me. So, I've had to think back to my first and second year economics all morning, which is always fun at 8 a.m.
Yep. And I think like the last topic you talked about was the most recent elections in Venezuela, was it?
Yes. Yep. That was a nightmare of an episode because contacts were telling us, look, there's a good chance that Maduro loses this thing. We kind of wrote an episode saying, he might, one way, and then everything happened. I went, I should have trusted my gut. He's going to rig that one. But yes, the whole episode again is such a classic kind of summary of our entire conversation here. Is everyone back in December was freaking out about Essequibo, part of Venezuela that has been claimed, going, oh, this is Venezuela. It's the river. The nearest population is a 300-person town that's a 30-day march away. Like, you're not going to, I can't remember the math off the top of my head, but we actually sat down for the episode and worked out, okay, they cross the river from their base they built, how long to get to the Guyanese capital? And you go, oh, okay, if you do it by proper road, you build the road with engineers, clearing at the rate the Americans could in Vietnam, which again is not what the Venezuelans can do. It was 5.5 years. Mm-hmm. And no attacks, 5.5 years to get there. I think with marching, I think they get there about 180, 190 days if they don't come under attack. Yeah. It's just actually taking people through that issue and going, look, I know all these people on YouTube are panicking, but let's listen to the boring economics guys and the military logistics guys who are going to go,
Economics and logistics, again, that can make or break a war, and people don't understand stuff like that.
It is all war. When I come across military analysts, if they talk to me about tank stats and how fast a tank goes, I know they're an amateur. If they bring out an Excel spreadsheet and talk about the economic efficiencies and the fuel consumption, that I know they're a real person.
Yeah, exactly.
Generally the rule of thumb. An army without bullets is just poorly dressed tourists.
Exactly. And this is why I talk about stuff like this. And it's just, people don't understand that, like, in war, in Afghanistan, the enemy knows if you take out an enemy's logistics, what do they lose? Their fuel. In Ukraine, the most attacked units that Russia has been losing has been logistics units. Artillery shells getting blown up. Fuel's not getting delivered. Food's not getting delivered. They're having to actually find and steal from people because they don't have food to feed their soldiers. People don't understand these things. If you could take out the logistics of any unit, that unit's gonna fucking mutiny.
Here's the thing. I can't remember if it was a Russian officer or a German officer. Somewhere years ago I spoke with, they described the US military to me as, it's a logistics organization that dabbles in warfighting. And I was like, that is the best description I've ever heard of the US Armed Forces. They are the best logistics organizers I've ever seen anywhere in the world. And this is, that's what war is. It's about logistics.
Absolutely.
Logistics planning. In the short term, it's about logistics. In the long term, it's about economics.
100%.
You know,
100%.
Yeah, it's like World War II guys be like, whoa, this battle where this German Tiger took out, 12 Panzers or 12 Sherman tanks. Oh, the Germans are great. And you realize that during that period of time, the Americans would have built another 120 tanks. So I don't know, man. Like economics.
The battle I think that's yours, a good place. But the war is far from over. Let's put it that way.
Look, the guys on the field fight with guns, but the general fighting with excellence. Yeah, both are really important, but it's long term as short term. I think it's a good way to end the guest. We've started on economics, and we're finishing with economics, and 100%. Realize why I thought the degree was interesting and why no one else did.
Yeah, well, and if people don't find this interesting, okay, that's just like a matter of taste. But the thing is, like, this may not be a sexy topic, but it's so important. Like everything is tied together. It's like one of my favorite topics is infrastructure, because everything is tied together. Economics, infrastructure, all of it is tied together, because if one thing fails, the whole thing comes apart. So, and I kind of do have to look at that. So anyway, Michael, once again, thank you so much. I'm always appreciative of you for like having these conversations. I always look forward to these intellectual conversations, and I hope people that are watching now and people that are going to be watching like on the replay, I really hope you learned something from this, because these are the topics that we should be discussing. It may not be as sexy, but honestly, it's important. These are the things that like, hopefully you kind of learned something from this episode. So, Michael, once again, thank you so much. You've always been a fantastic guest, and I appreciate your insight, and I appreciate your friendship all the same too.
No problem. It's always a pleasure to be here anytime.
Fantastic. So everybody that's watched tonight, I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend, and I will see you the next time on the next episode of Current Events on Tap. Have a good night.